Media.
A quick warning before we begin. This episode will contain the names of people and places that are entirely fictional, which I'm sure to mispronounce often. I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. Enjoy the show.
Between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Ares, there was an age undreamed of, when shining kingdoms lay spread across the world. Hither came Conan, the Cimmerian, sword in hand. It is I, his chronicler, who knows well his saga. Now let me tell you of the days of high adventure.
From Steeven Media, this is Hither Came Conan, the podcast that walked into this episode expecting it to be a bit of a short one, yet when all is said and done, it might end up being one of the longest episodes in Hither Came Conan history. I'm your host, my name is Steeven, and honestly, since I record everything in order, I really have no idea how long or even how short this episode will turn out to be. However, based on my notes, it looks like this is gonna be a long one, but I guess we'll see, right? I mean, I never have been a good judge of that sort of thing. Anyway, today we are looking at Conan the Barbarian, number 26. This episode sports a cover date of May 1973, though it hit the stands in February. It sold for just 20 cents, and it is entitled The Hour of the Griffin. It was written by Roy Thomas with pencils by John Buscema, inks by Ernie Chua, the letters were by John Costanza, and Glennis Ween was the colorist.
Into the boat!
Previously on Hither Came Conan. Makkalet, Makkalet's high priest of Tarim, has been seeing his own death at the hands of Conan each time he gazed into one of his many mystical mirrors. And so, as the Turanian army begins their attack on the city, the priest has Conan brought before him and subsequently dies under the barbarian's sword. As our story begins, Conan stands above the corpse of Makkalet as Prince Yezdegerd and his Turanian army begin their attack on the city of Makkalet.
Makkalet.
Conan is surprised to find that Chumbala Bey is still alive. The captain of the royal guard turned out to be a good, honorable man who, when he tried to help the barbarian in the previous issue, was rewarded with Makkalet's sword in his back.
Ain't that a bitch?
As Conan goes to the captain's aid, binding his wound, the two can hear that the attack on the city is underway, that Turanian soldiers have somehow breached the walls of the city, and so Conan and the captain beat feet.
Run away! Run away! Run away!
It's as they steal through the temple of Tarim that Conan and the captain come across a small force of Turanian soldiers who happen to be holding Queen Melisandre prisoner. Conan is then forced to fight them off, rescuing the queen in the process. Conan then bids the captain to take off, to run away with Queen Melisandre, and directs them to a certain passage, a tunnel that will lead them outside the city. The Cimmerian, in the meantime, will stay behind to draw off their pursuers. Eventually, Conan manages to find himself in a dark room where, sitting next to a flaming brazier, he finds the Living Tarim. The man god, Conan quickly discovers, is the product of generations of inbreeding.
All these royal types are inbreeding, wall-eyed, buck-toothed monsters who have to be wheeled around under a blanket.
Suddenly, the soldiers that had been hunting Conan burst into the room and begin firing arrows at him. While the barbarian grabs up a large chair to shield himself from the barrage, the Tarim is cut down by the volley of arrows and falls into the flaming brazier, dead.
Oh, be a shame if someone was to set fire to them.
Conan, however, manages to escape and is soon reunited with the captain and Queen Melisandre deep below the temple, where, because it's a Conan comic, the barbarian fights a giant, saber-toothed mole.
By the way, I realize that I have a large mole on my face. Where? What? Where's that mole? I didn't see one.
The Cimmerian kills the creature, and before long, the three are outside the city, fleeing in a stolen chariot, riding like the wind until Makkalet is nothing more than a city in miniature on the horizon.
Makkalet.
Conan, taking one of the horses, sends the captain and Queen Melisandre to her father in Pas de Shah as the Cimmerian rides south. Meanwhile, as the issue comes to an end, Prince Yezdegerd and his counselor, Sulamar, discover the charred and crispy corpse of the Tarim who lives no more.
Fires happen, Colonel. Things burn.
However, to keep up the illusion that the Tarim is a living god, they dress the remains in robes and prop up the body on a throne, carrying it through the streets of Makkalet to the sounds of cheering. The living Tarim, the man-god incarnate, has come home. All right, so not a lot of behind-the-scenes information on this one, with the exception that the inker on this issue is listed as Ernie Chua, which I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. However, if you look up the issue online, for example, if you go to Mike's Amazing World of Comics at mikesamazingworld.com, the inker is listed as Ernie Chan. Now, Ernie Chan has been a fairly big name in the comic book industry for a few decades. He was born in the Philippines in 1940. He began working in the comic book industry in 1972, and through the years, he has worked regularly for Marvel Comics on Conan the Barbarian, inking no less than 90 issues. He's got his name on a lot of books for both Marvel and DC, and he retired in 2002, but he's mostly known for his work on Conan, though it should be pointed out that between 1975 and 1976, he worked exclusively for DC, where he penciled the first 7 issues of a sword and sorcery comic, Claw the Unconquered, which was written by David Michelinie. And be honest, it looks a lot like a Conan comic book. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing it all up is that, as I said, the issue credits the inks for Conan the Barbarian number 26 to Ernie Chua, while various places online credit Ernie Chan. And the reason for this is pretty simple because, well, it's the same guy. Now, according to comic book scribe Roy Thomas, however, Ernie says due to some sort of ineptitude on part of the immigration official, his last name somehow got officially listed as Chua instead of Chan. So for the first several years of his American career, he was Ernie Chua, and only later, Ernie Chan. However, according to an interview in Marvel Age number 109 from December of 1991, Ernie says that the name confusion is due to, quote, a typographical error on my birth certificate that I had to use until I had a chance to change it to Chan when I got my citizenship in 76. So yeah, not that this is a controversial topic, and not that I believe Roy's out there trying to spread false information. I mean, unless we want to talk about the whole Wolverine thing. But I think that between the two stories, I'm going to believe Ernie's account over Roy's. Ernie Chan, by the way, passed away on March 16th, 2012 from cancer, which, yeah. Oh, and the Wolverine thing, do you really want to talk about it? I can do that, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's not a Wolverine podcast. But because it does involve Roy, I will give you a quick rundown. So apparently, earlier in the year, it had been revealed that when the Wolverine and Deadpool movie hits the theaters in July, when it gets to the bit in the credits that show who created Wolverine, Roy Thomas will appear in that list of names. Now, and again, I will try to be as brief as I can, but Wolverine first appeared in The Incredible Hulk number 180 from July the 2nd, 1974. And really, if I remember correctly, he doesn't actually show up in the issue until the very last page, which is why he's often credited as having his first full appearance in the next issue, The Incredible Hulk number 181, which was released on July 30th, 1974. So since then, the creation of Wolverine has always been credited to Lin Wein, who wrote those 2 issues of The Incredible Hulk, as well as Herb Trimpe, who penciled the issues, and John Romita Sr., who designed the costume. Chris Claremont and John Byrne are often mentioned as well, not in the creation of the character, but for ushering Wolverine into popularity from their work together on the Uncanny X-Men, which, it should be pointed out, Wolverine only became a member of the X-Men because Len Wein added him to the roster in Giant Size X-Men #1 from April of 1975.
My God, are you still talking?
So where does Roy Thomas come into all this? I'm glad you asked. At the time that those two issues of The Incredible Hulk were being put together, Roy was the editor-in-chief over at Marvel. And according to an article in Forbes from April, Roy claims that back in 1974, he had this idea for developing a Canadian character to appeal to Canadian readers. He claims that basically he made this edict to Len Wein that was like, hey, I want you to put a new character into a couple of issues of the Hulk. And I have 4 requirements for this character. He should be Canadian. He should be named Wolverine. He should be fierce because Wolverines are fierce. And he should be short because superheroes are usually tall. This, of course, caused a huge shitstorm online simply because, well, there's no evidence that this ever happened. And the only person who might be able to corroborate Roy's story is Len Wein, who unfortunately passed away in 2017. I mean, Herb Trimpe might have something to say about it, but he passed away in 2015. Now, there is a lot to unpack here. And again, this is not a Wolverine podcast. So I'm going to leave it to you to look into all of it for yourself. I will include a link to the Forbes article, but yeah, for me, I mean, I'm not really sure where I stand on the whole thing at all. I mean, it does seem odd that after all these years, every movie that Marvel has made that Wolverine was in, and not once was Roy Thomas credited. And then along comes this new movie, Wolverine and Deadpool. This will be the first movie with Wolverine in it that will credit Roy Thomas as one of the creators of Wolverine. And by odd coincidence, it's also the first movie that has Wolverine in it that's been released since Len Wein passed away. So yeah, have fun looking into all that. But again, for me, I just don't know what to think. Every time I pick a side, I find some new piece of information that swings me into the other direction. But here, I'll tell you what, let me wrap it all up with one quote from John Byrne, which he left on his forum, Byrne Robotics, on March 31st. Marvel now assigns creator credit on the basis of involvement, no matter what the degree. Look up Alpha Flight, and you will often find Chris Claremont and me listed as co-creators, and sometimes Chris as sole creator on the basis of Chris having been the first to script them, and despite him having nothing to do with the actual development of the characters. It's a far cry from when I started at Marvel. Then it was policy to deny any creator credit for fear it would imply ownership. So yeah, I mean, I take anything said about the comic book industry by John Byrne with a grain of salt because while I am a huge fan of his work, and he was super nice to me the multiple times I talked to him at one convention in Kansas City back in the 90s, he's also the guy who practically argued against creator rights in the 80s, or maybe the 90s, but he spoke proudly of his role as a cog in the Marvel machine. But I don't know, I think there's something to be said about the fact that for decades, Marvel didn't give a shit about creators or what they contributed to the larger Marvel universe, and now they appear to be sliding to the other end of the spectrum in an almost overcorrection. Plus, this new movie, Wolverine and Deadpool, or Deadpool and Wolverine, I don't remember what it's called. It is actually the first movie made solely by Marvel that has Wolverine in it. All those other movies were Fox movies. So yeah, again, form your own opinion. For me, I'm going to stop talking about Wolverine and get back to, well, not just Conan, but Conan the Barbarian number 26, because that's right, folks. It's time for everyone's favorite segment, Steven's favorite bits. Actually, I don't know if you noticed, but the synopsis I wrote for this issue was much shorter than normal. I mean, I have been making it a point to include every twist and turn and all the plot points when I write up a synopsis for these episodes. In fact, at one point, I would then go into the issue page by page and off the top of my head go through everything again. And well, it was pointed out that, why spend so much time giving a synopsis of the issue that literally goes through every little thing that happened to just go through it all over again during my deep dive or whatever that segment was called back then. Didn't really have a name. That's how Steeven's favorite bits came to be. However, that being said, when I do these episodes for the Marvel issues, I usually have a few resources that I can go to that will give me a lot of background information on the making of the issue, such as the book Barbarian Life, a literary biography of Conan the Barbarian by Roy Thomas, which would allow me to include a lot of fun and interesting information into the episode, which in turn helped to keep the episodes to at least 30 minutes long, because without the information bit, then the intro, synopsis, Steeven's favorite bits, and the wrap-up or the ending bit would make for a fairly short episode that, well, the bulk of that episode would be the synopsis, considering that, again, they can get fairly lengthy. Yeah, I know I'm over-explaining like crazy here, but other than the Ernie Chan / Ernie Chua thing, Roy really didn't have much to say about this issue in his book. And, well, I honestly hadn't planned on talking that long on the Wolverine thing. That just kind of happened. But knowing that the information bit was going to be pretty sparse, I made the decision to shorten the synopsis, hit just the super basic story bits. And then after that brief info bit, I would do that thing where I go page by page, dive in real deep, go through the whole story, and along the way, give you my thoughts and my feelings and all of that junk. What I'm trying to say, folks, and I took a long damn time getting to it, is that we are not going to do Steeven's favorite bits on this episode. Instead, this is going to be more like all the bits. All right, so if we start with the cover, it's a nice looking cover. It doesn't really pop out to me as just this classic looking piece of art. It's Conan. He's in a chariot. He's riding in a chariot. He's got the queen with him. They appear to be riding through the city, and there are soldiers just swarming the chariot. And while Conan is, of course, protecting the queen, he's cutting the soldiers down, and the city is on fire all around them. I mean, it is a fairly nice looking cover. It's pretty exciting. It just doesn't, I don't know. It doesn't just immediately stand out to me. It's not something that I look at and go, all right, that is a Conan cover right there. Let's get that made into a poster. It's all right. It's all right. It does say on the front, however, the fall of the towers. And I don't know, I guess the towers would be the Palace Royal and the Temple of Tarim, where Karamikad hangs his hat, I'm assuming. I find it odd that they often put these titles on these covers that are not the actual title to the issue. The title of this issue is The Hour of the Griffin, and yet it says The Fall of the Towers on the front.
Is there a point to this?
Getting into the issue, our very first page is a splash page, and it takes up literally moments after the previous issue. Conan has slain Karamikad. The high priest is laying there dead on the floor. As the previous issue ended, as Karamikad was dying, he had reached up to grab the tapestry that he had thrown over the giant mirror that had been showing him, that his own death was going to happen at the hands of Conan. He reaches up as he's dying and he grabs that tapestry and pulls it off of the mirror, or pulls most of it off the mirror. So as we open this issue, that's where we're at. Conan's looking into the mirror. He's got a bloody sword in his hand. Karamikad is dead on the floor. His hand is still entangled with the tapestry. And we can see what Conan sees in the mirror, which is Conan standing over the dead body of Karamikad. And then above him are the images of a lion, an eagle, and a snake. And we learned in the previous issue that, well, we Karamakad had been seeing this image every time he looked in the mirror, and he was freaking out, and he was trying to figure out what the lion and the eagle and the snake meant. And we learned that the eagle stood for the sword that Conan used to kill Karamakad, because it's got an eagle on the hilt. The snake stood for the straps to the shield that Karamakad tried to use when Conan was fighting him, because the straps of the shield were made from snakeskin. And then the lion stands for Conan, who we learn that at some point in the future will be known in certain areas of the land as Amra, which means lion. So we get this opening page. Again, it's a splash page. It's pretty nice looking. It's a good looking page. And it's basically a recreation of the final panel in the previous issue. And we go directly from there to, well, they're referred to as tableaus. And there are 4 of them, basically 4 scenes that quickly catch us up and put everything in place, basically, for this story. Because this is the final issue of the big war, the big Hyrcanian War, or the War of the Tarim, or whatever you want to call it. It's a big epic storyline that has been running through this title since what? Issue 19, maybe? And this is the one that wraps it up. And so they're kind of using these next few pages. Let's see. 2, 3, 4, and 5. So pages 2, 3, 4, and 5, they're each page is a tableau or a scene that just kind of puts all the pieces in place, puts all the characters where they need to be, sets everything up before we get into the final act of this story. Hither Came Conan will return after these messages.
Excuse me there, young fella. Is this where the bus to Carbondale stops?
Carbondale? Yeah, yep, this is the place.
I appreciate that, young fella. You mind if I sit here and wait with you?
Nope, go ahead. Rest your dogs.
Well, thanks again, young feller. What's that you're listening to?
Well, I'm listening to the Campus Comics Cast.
Campus Comics Cast? What is that, some sort of college for comic books?
No, not at all. Campus Comics Cast is a comic book podcast.
Well, you gotta admit, though, a comic book college would be pretty cool.
Right?
Anyway, tell me about this podcast. From what I could hear, it sounded mighty interesting.
Well, it's hosted by Mike, Scott, and Shad, and it's named for Campus Comics, the comic book store where the 3 hosts met and became friends.
No, ain't that just the sweetest?
Yeah, so episodes release twice a month, and one of those episodes is a review of the previews and a Lunar Next Phase catalogs where the guys highlight the upcoming comic book releases that excite them. The other episode is more like a catch-all where the guys talk about the latest news and such from the comic book industry and even review some comics.
So far, sounds like most other comic book podcasts to me.
Well, they do have a segment called The First 5, where they discuss the first 5 appearances of a character or an event. And they sometimes do the CLZ Shake.
The CLZ Shake? Is that new dance craze that the kids are all into?
No. CLZ is like this comic collecting app on your phone, and when you have it open and you give your phone a shake, the app will present you with a random comic from your collection. So on some of the episodes, the guys will get out their phones, they'll do the CLZ Shake, and then they will discuss whichever random issue popped up.
Well, that does sound kind of fun.
Well, yeah, that's because it is. Campus Comics Cast is a fun, informative podcast hosted by 3 really swell guys, and I would never fear recommending it to a stranger at a bus stop.
All right, then, where can I find this Campus Comics Cast?
Well, you can find Campus Comics Cast now on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And now back to Hither Came Conan. The first scene, or the first tableau, as they call it.
As the curtain rises on our verisimilitudinous tableau.
And I don't know why I keep kind of harping on that, I guess. It's not something that Roy Thomas has used previously. A tableau, according to the internet, is a graphic description or representation. So basically, I guess it's just a fancy way for him to go, here is the first scene. And you get a bit of text to set up kind of what's going on. And it's the army of Turin with Prince Yezdegerd at the head. They're racing toward the city of Makkalet.
Makkalet.
Actually, Yezdegerd's not at the head, like a true ruler. He's all the way in the back. And he's kind of watching his forces as they lay siege to the city. And he's a pretty dark character. He's a pretty heartless bastard. I mean, here in just this one scene, he's talking to his counselor, his I don't know if you'd consider him his right-hand man, but Sulamar, and he's telling him, well do I see it, Sulamar, those haughty ramparts crumbling each on each, Makkalet's palace in flames, her women weeping for dismembered husbands. Which, that's pretty dark. Basically, he's saying, I can see it now, we're going to win. But he has to, I mean, he can't just say that. He's got to include that the women will be weeping not for their dead husbands, for their dismembered husbands. It's not enough that his soldiers kill the men in the city. They must be dismembered. So yeah, he's kind of a cold, heartless bastard. And then, of course, he talks about how much he's looking forward to seeing Conan's head mounted on his sword. And that's when a pair of soldiers come up and they've got a prisoner with them. It's a guy from within the city. He was once a laborer within the city's temple, and he is there to bargain for his life. And he tells Prince Yezdegerd that there is a cave on the side of the city that faces the sea, or as they refer to it, the nether side of the city. There's a cave there that if you go into the cave, it leads, there's a tunnel that leads to the temple within the city. And he's hoping that, hey, I here's this information. It'll get your men into the city with no fuss. Doesn't that deserve a reward? And Yezdegerd, being who he is, says, oh yeah, that deserves a reward. And here it is. And he kills him. And as far as Yezdegerd is concerned, the reward is an instant death and not a month or so spent with Turanian torturers. And then he tells his soldiers to kick this carrion out of my way and orders them to send a ship over there to the nether side of the city to look for this cave. That's when we switch over to the second scene, or the second tableau, and it's one of Yezdegerd's ships that just happens to be over there on the nether side of the city. This is not the one that, this isn't the ship that he orders over there. It just happens to be over there. And the text, the narration tells us that this ship was sitting there when Conan killed Karamakad. And moments after Karamakad died, there was a small, earthquake. And that earthquake caused a bunch of rocks on this cliff face to shift aside so that the sailors and soldiers upon this ship can now see the cave that the guy in the previous scene was talking about. And this scene for me is very dumb for a couple of reasons. One, it's like they make a point in the previous scene to tell us, here's this guy from within the city, and he is bargaining for his life, and he tells the prince about this cave that they can use. And then we get to the second scene, and we find out that the guy didn't have to tell the prince that at all, because the soldiers in this ship, they just stumbled across the cave.
We just stumbled onto it.
Which brings us to the second dumb thing about this scene, because when the soldiers and the sailors aboard this ship, when they find this cave, when the rocks fall away and they can see from the ship, oh, look, there's a big old cave over there, they just immediately assume that, I don't know, that the cave is going to lead them inside the city. They don't quite say that, but that's what ends up happening. They go into the cave, and then they go in, and from the cave, they get into the city. So I don't know if they don't clarify if these soldiers see this cave from the ship and they think to themselves, hey, we have to go investigate that cave. We have to go check it out. Which, even if that's the case, they see this happening, they see the cave over there, and they think to themselves, oh, we got to get off this ship and go check out that cave. And then through their exploration of the cave, they stumble upon the fact that it leads into the city. Regardless, it's dumb. It's dumb that they would just immediately think that they have to go check out this cave. There's no reason for it. There's no reason at all for them to want to go check out the cave. There's just, I don't know. This is a dumb scene.
It's just so dumb.
We get to the next page, which is the third scene or the third tableau, and it's within the city, and we are with the king and the queen, actually, and the king is sending Queen Melisandre away. And I suddenly can't remember the king's name off the top of my head, Ionitum or something like that. But anyway, he sends her away, but she doesn't want to go because they love each other so much, which is quite the change from when we first meet the king and queen back in, issue 19. And I actually had to go back and look at that issue, the first moment we meet the king and queen, because if you remember in the episode in which I talked about issue number 19, my first impression upon meeting the king and queen of Makkalet was that the queen didn't really care much for her husband, that she didn't respect him, and that she had a thing for the high priest, Karamikad. And yet here we are, issue 26, and we saw a bit of it in the previous issue, but the queen seems to have really warmed up to the king. She seems to be just madly in love with him. She won't leave his side. We learn a little bit later. There's a bit near the end of the issue that we'll talk about that I think explains this sudden change of the queen's heart. But the king wants to send her away. She doesn't want to go. And he tells her, look, obviously I don't want you here because I don't want you to die because I love you. You're my wife and blah, 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 and all that romantic crap. But in a practical sense, one of us has to stay here and lead the defense of the city. And that's going to be me, the king. And I will probably die doing that. So you, the queen, you need to leave. You need to be away so that if the city falls, there is still one member of royalty that can, I guess, get the people back together and fight back and all that crap. And so she agrees, and he sends her to the temple of Tarim and states that if any man can steal her safely through Turanian lines, it is Karamikad, which we all know is not going to happen because old Karamikad's dead. And then that, of course, leads us to scene number 4, or tableau. I don't know why I keep saying it like that. Tableau. Sound like an asshole. But anyway, tableau number 4, we're back with Conan. We're back at the scene where Conan is standing over the corpse of Karamikad. But now we're looking at it from a different perspective. We are seeing it as if we are the mirror, basically looking out upon the dead, open-eyed face of Karamikad and Conan standing behind him. Conan looks into the mirror. We saw that on the first page. He was looking into the mirror and he saw what Karamikad had been seeing, the visions of Karamikad's death. But suddenly, as he's staring into the mirror, the scene within the mirror, the image within the mirror begins to shift. And we don't know what it is. They don't tell us what the image is changing to, but it's telling us that it's something a bit more deadly. And that if, any other man or a civilized man were standing there instead of Conan, they might be seeing this image coming up and they might stop and stare in curiosity and then be lost within the mirror, which is basically what we learned about King Cole in the previous issue from however many thousands of years ago when the mirrors belonged to Tuzenthun. Cole got lost in the mirrors for a while and his buddy Brule had to come save him. But as this issue points out, Conan's not a civilized man. He's not a regular dude. And as soon as the image starts to shift into something more deadly, Conan just puts his boot into the mirror and shatters it. And as he's pulling his foot free from this shattered mirror, he hears this groan and he turns to find out that the captain of the guard, Chumbala Bey, is alive. And I'll be honest, I was just as surprised as Conan to find out that the dude was alive, because as far as we knew in the last issue, he's the guy that in issue 24, I think it was, Conan and Red Sonja stole the guy's horse. And then in the previous issue 25, Karamikad sends him, Chumbala Bey sends him after Conan because Karamikad wants Conan in front of him because he knows Conan's going to kill him. And so obviously if this guy's going to kill him, try to put myself in the shoes of Kramakad, thinking that decision over. Here's a guy who's going to kill me, so let's get him in front of me right away so that, I can make it easier for him to kill me. But Chumbala Bey is the guy that brought Conan to Kramakad. Again, he's the captain of the Royal Guard. And he was not all that happy with seizing Conan and taking him to the high priest. And at one point in the previous issue, when a creepy tentacled monster comes out of one of the mirrors to kill Conan, the Chumbala Bey gives Conan his sword, which is the sword with the eagle on the hilt, and Conan is able to use it to kill this monster and, in essence, survive, and he, don't know why I'm stumbling across these words so badly, but he attests that to Chumbala Bey saved his life, is what I'm trying to say. And so he feels like he owes the captain a little something, so he goes to patch the guy up, and it's as he is binding his wound that they realize, they can hear that the city is under siege and that the soldiers have, the Turanian soldiers have breached the walls and they're within the city. Well, this is where we learn how the soldiers who are on the ship in that earlier scene that found the cave, they go into the cave, they go through the tunnels. Apparently the tunnels beneath the city that start out in this cave they're just all kinds of tunnels, a labyrinthine maze of tunnels under the city. And one of them leads to this statue that appears to be in the middle of the city, like in the city square, the statue of a winged horse. And so these Turanian soldiers find themselves within the horse, and a little door opens up in the horse's belly and they come climbing out. And from there, they open up the gates and let all the other soldiers in. And I don't know. It's a really, really, really dumb part of this issue. We know, based off of Roy Thomas's book, Barbarian Life, a literary biography of Conan the Barbarian, Volume 1, that this whole epic holy war story, that Roy was kind of inspired by the whole Trojan War thing. And so this is his chance, I guess, to sneak in the Trojan horse. But the way the horse is drawn, and Roy points out in his book that the horse's legs are too small because, okay, let me back up a second. The way that the horse is drawn, it's on the top of like a big tower, basically. So these soldiers coming through this tunnel would have to come up through this tower and then into one of the legs of the horse to get up into the body of the horse to come out of the door in its belly. Well, Roy points out that the way that the horse was drawn, that the legs are obviously not big enough for a person to climb through, which I didn't notice, and I don't think anybody else noticed. But I don't know, just the idea that a tunnel would lead to a secret passage within a tower that would lead into a secret passage inside this statue of a horse. I don't understand the purpose of it, because looking at the panel, it doesn't appear to be, if you're thinking about hidden passageways inside of palaces and temples and whatnot, it's so the royals or the priests or whatever can escape through the hidden tunnels and whatnot. But I just can't imagine somebody going, all right, we got to escape. Let's climb up the outside of this tower, I guess, and go somehow get a rope up into the belly of this horse, because it's a very long fall from the belly of the horse to the top of the to the top of the tower. It's just dumb. It's a dumb idea, and it's foreshadowed. I think it was in the previous issue when the soothsayers of Yezdegerd, they are looking at the smoking guts of some dead animal, and they say that the Griffin shall bite the serpent in twain when the horse spawns walking swords. And of course, Yezdegerd thought that was, it sounds like nonsense, but, whatever. My soldiers will love to hear it and love to hear of our victory that's being foretold. And so the Griffin, of course, is that would represent the Turanians, because their royal symbol is the Griffin, while the royal symbol of Makkalet is the serpent. So Turin will destroy Makkalet when basically soldiers come out of the statue of a horse. That's what the soothsayers foretold in a very weird way, when the horse spawns walking swords, which, I don't know, it's just dumb. It's just dumb. And I'm trying to imagine Roy putting this story together, and he's thinking to himself, all right, so I'm inspired by the whole Trojan War. So of course I've got to put a scene in here with soldiers coming out of a fake horse. So it'll be like the Trojan horse. And now I want to write a bit for this issue in which a bunch of soothsayers predict that this will happen, but I got to say it in a mysterious way. So you don't just read it and go, oh, well, obviously they're going to do a Trojan horse thing in this. So he writes the phrase, the Griffin shall bite the serpent in twain when the horse spawns walking swords. And I don't know, I just feel like he tried a bit too hard with that.
Don't try so hard.
So as we move on, the soldiers are now within the city. They're killing and all the stuff that soldiers do. We go back to Conan and Chumbala Bay. They're trying to escape. They're making their way through the temple. Chumbala Bay is very weak. He's kind of hanging off of Conan's arm. And they just happen to come across a group of Turanian soldiers who happen to have captured the queen. And so Conan has to fight off these soldiers. Now, he doesn't want to rescue the queen because he thinks that the queen in, oh my God, what issue was that?
Calculating.
Issue 21, The Monster of the Monoliths, where Karamakad and the king and queen send Conan and a bunch of soldiers off on a mission. And during this mission, they're being sent to Padishah, which is the city where the queen's father lives. They're sent there to ask the queen's father for aid. But before they get there, we find out that actually the plan was that one of the soldiers was to sacrifice Conan and the other soldiers in a dark ritual to summon this toad monster, demon, otherworldly creature to come to the aid of Makkalet, I guess. But Conan is given this armlet by the queen and is told that it'll protect him, but he learns that it actually draws the monster to him. And so he, of course, blames the queen for that. She's the one that gave him the armlet. So in this issue, when he and the captain come across these soldiers and see that they have captured the queen, Conan's not really interested in rescuing her, but because the soldiers immediately attack Conan in Chumbala Bay, Conan has to fight back. But there's a lot of dumb things that happen in this issue. I'll tell you right now, I did enjoy this issue, but I am pointing out a lot of dumb things that happen. And this dumb thing is that as the soldiers attack, Conan runs. He's not armed at this point. I don't know. Oh, it looks like he's given the eagle-hilted sword back to Chumbala Bay, which makes sense because the captain of the guard is super weak and has to hang off of Conan's arm just to walk through the hallways. So, of course, give him the sword. And so when the soldiers attack, Conan runs behind the altar within whatever big room they're in the Temple of Tarim. And he places himself between the wall and the altar. He puts his back to the wall. He puts his feet up to the altar and he pushes until the altar falls over, falls on top of some of these soldiers and crushes and kills some of them. But here, let me read to you how the narration describes this moment. Instinctively, Conan crouches behind the massive flame-lit altar. He braces mighty barbarian thews against finely carved marble, begins to push, and slowly, ever so slowly, or so it seems, the altar begins to sway till suddenly, and then that's when the altar falls over. But they make it sound as if it takes him a bit, obviously, to get this frickin' thing to fall over. And all I can think of is that while he's doing this, what are the soldiers doing? Did they chase him behind the altar and now they're just standing there in front of the altar going, oh, where'd he go? He ran behind that altar, but I don't see him, so obviously he disappeared. Or are they standing there going, well, he's behind the altar, guys. We can't do anything because, there's space there between the altar and the wall. And, we could get back there and stick them with our swords, but nah, we'll just hang out here. Hey, is the altar moving? And then, of course, they're all crushed by the altar. some of the soldiers survive. They're not all standing there like idiots in front of this altar, just standing around waiting while Conan pushes it over. The others that survive, Conan leaps over the rubble that was this big stone altar, and he just starts kicking a bunch of ass. And again, I want to read to you this narration because I love this bit here. So the altar falls. Conan says, "The altars of gods are good for something after all," which is a great line. And then he leaps over the remains of the altar, and the narration says, "No more talking now. The brawny young Cimmerian leaps, panther-like, into the ranks of the frenzied survivors, bearing all before him like so many blades of grass." Which sounds like something that Robert E. Howard would write. It's a very good bit of narration there, and it's what Conan does. He just kicks all kinds of ass. And of course, as he's fighting these soldiers unarmed, he's able to pick up a sword, and he's just mowing down these soldiers. At one point, he picks one of them up and throws him through, he picks up one of the soldiers and actually throws the guy into the other soldiers and knocks them down. He doesn't kill them all because there's a lot of them. I think Conan understands that he's not going to be able to kill every single one of them. So he throws the one guy at the rest, knocks him down, and then he picks up the queen, and they all go running away. It's as they are running through the hallways, running from these soldiers who are pursuing them, that Conan sends Chumbalabe and the queen, he sends them off through the tunnel that he knows will take them to the cave outside the city, because he had actually taken that route back in issue number 20, The Black Hound of Vengeance. It was down here among those tunnels, or, down there among those tunnels that he fought the Black Hound of Vengeance. And so he sends them away, sends them to safety. He stays behind to draw off their pursuers. He's running through the hallways. The soldiers are chasing him. And that's when he gets into this room where he finds the Living Tarim. And when he goes into the room, there appears to be just one way into the room. It's a big, heavy oak door. And he gets into the room, he closes the door, he bolts it behind him. He sees the Tarim there, and there have been a few moments, at least one other, where Conan has, actually I think it's been at least twice, where Conan has come across the Tarim once or twice before throughout this storyline. And we always see the Tarim in his robes. He's got his hood up. We never see his face. He never talks. And Conan wants to see the guy's freaking face. This is the guy that ultimately is the reason behind this entire war. Makkalet had this idea that the Living Tarim is their god, basically. He is the reincarnation over generations of this god. And he's always been in, I think it's Agripur, the capital of Turin, which the king of Turin is Yildiz, which is a dumb name. And his son is Prince Yezdegerd. Well, Makkalet from over in Makkalet has this idea to kidnap the Tarim and bring him to Makkalet, which is ultimately what starts the war. And so much blood has been shed over this one man, this so-called god. And Conan just wants to look at the guy's goddamn face. And so when he reaches for the guy kind of freaks out because Conan's yelling at him. He wants him to turn around. He wants to look at the guy's face, and the guy kind of falls over, and he's got this brazier next to him that is providing a little light to the room. There's kind of a cover over the top of it with the sides of it are open. That's where the light's coming out. But when the Tarim kind of freaks out, he falls out of his chair and he falls across the brazier and knocks the top off of it. So the room is suddenly flooded with light. We see that there's mirrors covering the surface of the walls and the ceiling, and the guy's hood falls off, and Conan can now see that the Tarim is the product of generations of inbreeding. He's literally like a drooling idiot. I mean, he is drooling. You see his face. His mouth is hanging open. His tongue is lolling out. He's drooling. He's only got patches of hair on his head. And Conan looks at the Living Tarim, sees what he actually is, and then he just starts laughing. He just starts laughing out loud. He throws his head back and just starts laughing. And that's when the big oak door splits open. The soldiers of Turin are outside, and they chop the door down with an axe, and they all come storming into the room, and they expect that Conan will run, but instead Conan just stands there at the door and starts chopping them down as they come into the room. But there's a bunch of them, and once they get the door cleared, once there's room, the captain or whoever's leading these soldiers, he gets a group of them together who are archers, and he has them shoot a bunch of arrows at Conan. Conan's able to pick up a big chair and hold it up in front of him like a shield, so he is not hit by any of the arrows. But the Tarim is shot down, and he's shot to death by these soldiers who ultimately are there to get the Tarim back. That's their job. That's why they're there. They're there to free the Tarim and bring him back to Agripur. They don't realize that that's who this is because they've never seen him, but they shoot him down, and he falls into the fire, and he catches fire. And so we don't know if it's the arrows that kill him or if it's the fire, but the Tarim is now dead.
Things burn.
We get to see a bit of the king, King Eonatum. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. That's why I have the warning there at the beginning of each of the episodes. I'm bound to mispronounce all of these fictional names of people and places. But the king is leading his men, fighting the soldiers. The king is actually doing a lot of the fighting himself. When we come to the king in this scene, all the soldiers, all the Makkalet soldiers that are with him are dead. He's the last man standing. And they make it a point to state that if the queen were to see him now, she would not recognize him at all, because the king, she knows the king is kind of this gentle weakling, basically. But here he is fighting for his life. He's got this really savage look on his face as he's cutting down soldiers. But in the end, one of the Turanians creeps up behind him and sticks him in the back with a sword and kills him. Hither Came Conan will return after these messages. Hey folks, I want to tell you about Magazines and Monsters, a podcast that's dedicated to comic books as well as classic horror and sci-fi films. This podcast channel contains a bunch of shows like the Bronze Age of Horror Comics, a podcast that's, well, it's about Bronze Age horror comics. There's also The Brave and the Bob, a show celebrating Volume 1 of The Brave and the Bold from DC Comics and all things Bob Haney. But hey, let's not forget the main show itself, Magazines and Monsters, which rotates between old-school horror and sci-fi films with a heavy emphasis on the British studios Hammer and Amicus. Plus, you'll get a selection of episodes about comic books, ranging from DC to Marvel and everything in between. So join your host Billy D and a few of his favorite friends for a fun and positive look at his 2 favorite pastimes. Find Magazines and Monsters now on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And now back to Hither Came Conan. The moment he dies, we immediately switch to the tunnels where Queen Melisandre is with Chumbala Bay, and she suddenly cries out like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars when when Alderaan is blown up by the Death Star. Obi-Wan Kenobi is suddenly like, oh, suddenly I have this feeling, this disturbance in the Force. Billions of voices crying out and suddenly silenced. I don't remember the exact line.
I felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced.
But it's a bit like that, because suddenly the queen cries out her husband's name, because she knows at that moment that he is dead. Chumbala Bay, however, he's trying to reassure her, telling her that he has his guard around him and they will protect him. They will never let him die. And then suddenly Conan's there. I guess he was creeping up as they were talking, and he points out that all men die. And then he cracks a little joke that's just for himself. He says, all men can die, Chumbala Bay. All men, and it seems, all gods. And then I imagine Conan kind of going, kind kind of chuckling to himself. Queen Melisandre is very happy to see Conan, and she's like, "Oh, Conan, I'm so happy you're alive." I'm paraphrasing. "Oh, so happy that nothing has happened to you. You're alive, you big, strong, muscly man." And Conan is like, "Shut up. Get off me. You tried to kill me. You're the one that gave me the freaking armlet that drew that monster toward me." And she tells him that, well, yeah, she gave him the armlet, but she didn't know that it was going to do that. And besides, Makkalet is the one that gave her the armlet and told her to give it to Conan so that he would be protected. And I know I talked about that in the episode in which I talked about Conan the Barbarian, issue number 21, The Monster of the Monoliths, that, you know, it was a possibility that the queen had nothing to do with the armlet. You know, I postulated that Makkalet could have given her, they refer to it in this issue as an amulet. And that's exactly what happened. And Conan, boy, I tell you, he turns around very quickly once he learns this news. He's just suddenly like, Makkalet? Oh, well, all right, that makes sense. By the way, I think you're very beautiful. And he leans into her like he's about to kiss her, but then they end up moving on. They come across the skeleton of the big Black Hound of Vengeance that he fought in issue 20. And Conan wonders why, because he says it was, a few weeks ago that he fought the Hound, and now it's just a skeleton. Its bones have been picked clean, and he wonders what has done that. And that's when we're introduced to the giant saber-toothed mole.
Don't say mole.
Stop.
I said mole.
Stop.
Bye, mole.
That Conan has to fight. And we're told that the whole reason that the big Black Hound of Vengeance was down there in the first place was to protect the temple from this big saber-toothed mole, which seems really kind of a stupid thing, stupid reason. It just seems dumb. To me, that feels like kind of at the last minute when Roy was putting this issue together, he said, all right, well, we need a monster for Conan to fight because it's a Conan comic. We've got a lot of stuff going on in this issue, and Conan is maybe in 50%, maybe 70% of this issue. He's not doing his thing throughout the entire issue. A lot of it has to do with what's going on with the war and the battle within the city. And it just feels like Roy's like, all right, so we need a monster for Conan to fight. We need stuff for him to do. So let's put a monster down here in these tunnels. And then kind of thought to himself, but we already had that big Black Hound of Vengeance down here in the tunnels. How could there be another monster down here? People are gonna wonder. And so he just kind of comes up with this idea that the Hound was there to protect, to keep the freaking mole from going up in the temple. It's just dumb. But Conan fights the mole. He loses his sword at one point, so he does that thing that King Kong did when he fought the big snake in the original movie, and the big snake in the well, I don't know if it was a big snake in the original. It might have been a dinosaur in the original. I think it was a big snake in the 80s version. And then a couple of dinosaurs in the Peter Jackson version. But basically, Conan grabs the mouth of the mole. He grabs one of the big teeth, one of the big saber teeth, and then he grabs the bottom part of the mouth. And then he just opens the frickin' creature's mouth to the point where it snaps its jaw, which I guess just kills it. Maybe he twists the thing's neck and breaks its neck, but they don't really clarify how he killed it, just that he used his barbarian thews. But he only has a couple of moments to rest after he kills the mole. They move on, and they eventually get to the mouth of the cave. They're outside, and they encounter 3 Turanian soldiers who have been kind of left out there at the mouth of the cave just as guards in case anyone from Makkalet tried to use the tunnels in the cave to escape. And with them is a chariot that's attached to 2 horses. And so when Conan and the queen and the captain, when they come out of this cave, they're actually coming out onto like a ledge. And looking out over the ledge, down below them are these soldiers with the chariot and the 2 horses. And Conan is, he's like, all right, we got to get this chariot. And so he leaps off of the edge. He leaps off of this ledge. And it's pretty awesome because he falls atop one of the soldiers, but he does it in such a way that when he comes down atop this soldier, he basically drives his knee into the back of this soldier's neck and just breaks his neck as he falls atop him. So bang, one soldier dead. And as soon as he hits the ground, both he and this dead soldier, Conan suddenly, for some reason, has a dagger. I don't know where he got the dagger. I don't know if he grabbed it from the soldier, but he throws a dagger at the other soldier, kills the second soldier, and then this third guy, the third soldier, he ends up having to fight fisticuff style, or they actually wrestle. Because the other guy, the third soldier, again, it's kind of dumb. Because you got these three Turanian soldiers, and the two that Conan take out right away, they're wearing the uniform of the Turanian soldier. They're fully covered from, they got long pants, they got long sleeve shirts. They're wearing these helmets with the cloth that comes down the sides and the back of the helmet. But the third guy, who is just this big hulking giant of a man, because he's just this big muscly dude, he's basically dressed like Conan. He has little trunks on, he's got boots on, and he's got no shirt, so we can, see his big muscles. But Conan fights him and breaks that guy's neck too. So Conan is literally breaking necks in this freaking issue. He breaks the first soldier's neck, he breaks the third soldier's neck. Did I say that right? He breaks the first soldier's neck, he breaks the third soldier's neck, and he probably broke the neck of that freaking giant saber-toothed mole. Anyway, with these soldiers dead, the Conan and the queen and the captain, they board the chariot and they ride away until they're so far outside the city that it's just this little thing on the horizon with smoke and flame coming from the top of it. The city is in flames. And Conan, well, actually the queen, she's looking at the city as it burns, burns to the ground, and she vows that there will be a new Makkalet one day.
Makkalet.
That she will bring her people back together, basically, and lead a new city of citizens. And Conan tells her, he basically he makes a proposition to her. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to go through all that bother, forget trying to be a queen, and how about you come with me instead and you be my woman? And we go around and I fight dudes and monsters and wizards and stuff. And you just be by my side and be good looking and, we'll get naked and stuff. And she's like, no, I can't do that. I mean, she obviously has a thing for him, but she says no. Conan asks her why, and she says because she's going to have a baby and she's hoping, maybe it's going to be a son. And that, for me, that explains why over the last couple of issues, when it seemed fairly obvious from the beginning of the storyline that the queen didn't think much of her husband, why suddenly she would have this change of heart. It's because she's going to have a baby. She's going to have, again, what she's hoping is a son because, of course, men rule and women drool, I guess. And but of course, if it's a son, then he will be a prince and she will raise a king and start up a new city of Makkalet and blah, 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 and all that crap. And he's like, all right, whatever. Takes one of the horses and he points them off in a direction. He says, you go that way and you'll come across Padishah, which is the city of her father. And then he rides away. The issue ends with a one-page epilogue in which we learn, of course, that Yezdegerd and Sulamar found the Tarim. The Tarim, of course, is dead, burned to a crisp, and they take the body of the Tarim, they put a robe on it, they bind it to a throne in such a way that anybody looking wouldn't notice that there are ropes holding a corpse to a throne. The people that see this body, this robed body in the throne, just assume that it's the living Tarim, not a dead body. And we can see at least the face, at least the head of the body is the skull, which makes me wonder, because when they show Yezdegerd and Sulamar coming across the dead Tarim, the body is still smoking, it's charred and crispy, but now it appears to be a skeleton. So I guess they cleaned They cleaned all the charred flesh off of it, dressed it in a robe, tied it to a throne, and then they parade through the streets of Makkalet so that all the soldiers can cheer for Prince Yezdegerd and the living Tarim, which was their goal in the first place. And that's how the issue ends. I did enjoy the issue. I had fun with it. It was a fun issue. It had some great moments. It had some really dumb moments, but I really enjoyed it. Roy really goes into, well, he doesn't really go in. He doesn't spend a lot of time. He doesn't spend a lot of time talking about this issue at all in his book, but he talks about Ernie Chan, the inker, who goes on to ink 89 more issues of this title. And he talks about the art team that Ernie Chan and John Buscema become on this issue, and how John Buscema, who is an amazing artist, I love him. I guess his pencils ultimately, they were not as detailed as what Barry Windsor Smith's pencils came to be on the issue. Barry Windsor Smith was very detailed, which is why they were always having problems with issues threatening to be late and having to add extra inkers and do breakdowns and all that crap to the title. But Ernie Chan, apparently as an inker, brings this level of detail to John Buscema's pencils that, as far as Roy was concerned, helped with the transition from Barry Windsor Smith to John Buscema. I'll be honest, when I first read this issue, I was not all that impressed with the art. Was really excited to get into some John Buscema on this book, and the addition of Ernie Chan as the inker, it changed the look of John Buscema's art just enough, just slightly, that for some reason it didn't appeal to me right away. It didn't feel like John Buscema. It looks like John Buscema, but it didn't feel like John Buscema. I'm more used to John Buscema on the Avengers in the 80s when Tom Palmer was inking him. Love Tom Palmer and John Buscema. But as I went through the issues, or as I went through the issue a few more times to get the notes together and whatnot, the art really did end up growing on me, and I can look at it with a different appreciation now. But yeah, really, really enjoyed the ending of the whole War of the Tarim, or the Hyrcanian Holy War epic storyline, or whatever you want to call it. I think they wrapped it up very nicely. I like that the Tarim turned out to be this, inbred imbecile, basically, and that despite the fact that the dude is dead, they're still propping him up as the god, the living god. And so it really, the Tarim ultimately is like a figurehead for the religion. It doesn't matter who's in the robes, ultimately. They just need somebody to sit there and not say anything. And a corpse works just as well as somebody who is willing to just sit there and not say anything. So I really did enjoy the ending on this, and I enjoyed the story. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, but that's it. That's all I have to say about Conan the Barbarian issue number 26. What about y'all? What'd you think? Did you like it? How are you feeling about the post Barry Windsor Smith issues so far? I know we've just had 2, but how's the art change treating you? How'd you feel about my slight format change in this episode? Is that treating you well? Let me know. Feedback at hithercameconan.com.
Everybody out!
Next time on Hither Came Conan, we take a look at Conan the Barbarian number 27, The Blood of Bel-Hassar, from March 1973. The synopsis used in this episode was written by me, your host. My name is Steeven, and much of the information used in this episode comes from Mike's Amazing World of Comics at mikesamazingworld.com, Wikipedia, Forbes.com, and the book Barbarian Life, a Literary Biography of Conan the Barbarian, Volume 1 by Roy Thomas, which you can get along with Volumes 2 and 3 at cimmerianpress.com. And finally, the views and opinions expressed within this episode are mine and mine alone, and do not reflect the official policy or position of Conan, his sword, his steely thews, and especially not his god Crom, who really doesn't give a fuck. But before I let you go, folks, I do have a few more things to talk about. Some house cleaning, as some podcasters would call it. So here you go. First off, the super secret Steeven Society has now become Steeven or Else Beyond. This is my subscription program, and if you join, you'll get all your episodes of Hither Came Conan early and ad-free. To be fair, this episode wasn't super early. I mean, I didn't even get it to you 24 hours early, but in general, you'll get these episodes 72 hours to a week early. I mean, I do have a life, outside the show, and as much as I try not to let it get in the way, life is a bit like Crom. It cares not for your plans. But to continue, I have a new show, a new podcast that I'm hoping to release by the end of June. And if you are a member of Steeven or Else Beyond, when that new show lands, you will get all 6 episodes of the first season ad-free to binge at once. Not only will all 6 episodes release ad-free on the same day for members of Steeven or Else Beyond, they will also release the week before the first episode releases with ads on the regular feed for everyone else. With that said, episodes of Hither Came Conan for the time being will release every 2 weeks while I finish getting this new show ready. You'll notice, by the way, that I haven't mentioned the name of this new show yet, and that's on purpose. It's because I'm not quite ready to announce it just yet. When I am ready, however, I will post a special short episode here on Hither Came Conan that'll be kind of like a trailer for this new podcast, but with a bit more added to it. All 6 episodes of this new show have been recorded, and I'm nearly finished getting episode 3 all edited up and ready for release. Now, I do say this next bit during the closing music, but in case you don't stick around for all that, you can join Steeven or Else Beyond through Apple Podcasts, Patreon, or Substack. You can tap the link in the show notes or just go to hithercameconan.com to choose which option is best for you. And I think that's it. I mean, it's possible that on top of this new unnamed mystery show, I might have another exciting announcement for y'all, but, well, I tend to make announcements like that on This Is Not a Test first.
This is not a test.
Which is a monthly podcast exclusive only to members of Steeven or Else Beyond. All right, I'm going to stop trying to sell stuff now, and instead I will wrap all this up by reminding you to keep your swords close by, to never stop treading them jeweled thrones, and most importantly, as always, to be nice to each other. Bye. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Hither Came Conan. Questions and comments can be directed to feedback@hithercameconan.com or come join us on social media. Just look for @Conan Podcast on Twitter and Blue Sky and @HitherCameConan on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook. If you enjoyed the show, you can help to boost our presence online by leaving a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. I also invite you to join our subscription program, Steeven or Else Beyond, and in return, you'll get episodes of Hither Came Conan early and ad-free. You can subscribe to Steeven or Else Beyond through Apple Podcasts, Patreon, or Substack. Check out the link in the show notes or just go to hithercameconan.com to choose the option that's best for you. Hither Came Conan is a presentation of Steeven or Else Media. For more nerdy content hosted by me, check out stevenorelse.com.
Many wars and feuds did Conan fight. Honor and fear were heaped upon his name. In time, he became a king by his own hand. This story shall also be told.
Recording. As our story begins, Conan stands above the corpse of Makkalet as Prince who, when he tried to help the barbarian in the previous issue, was rewarded. It's as they steal through the temple of Tarim that Conan and the captain, he worked exclusively for DC, where he puzzled. Puzzle this, sucker! And with that, I am finally done.
I just don't think I can move through life knowing that a guy named Steeven did this to me.
How could you let this happen, Steeven?
Peter! Oh, God, sorry. You're right. Let's go to the dance.
Enough talk.
I love Makkalet.
Makkalet.